Hi, Eugene. How are you?
Hi, Anna. I'm good. How are you today?
Great, great. For those people who haven't seen our videos before on the research that we've done and all the podcasts, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jenna London, founder of the Natural Women's Council, and we are going to review the primary school draft curriculum. And Eugene is a retired director of in the engineering field and has done research over the last how many years, Eugene, have you been researching this topic?
About two and a half years, maybe.
Two and a half years,
Yeah.
and it's hundreds and hundreds of hours of research. So we have the draft primary school curriculums consultation opened up in March, and it's no surprise that parents were not notified by any way through the school or Department of Education that the consultation opened nearly 2 months ago. And it closes in 2 weeks' time on the 7th of June. So we have had a core team working on the research for this, led by Eugene with a group of retired teachers, or retired NCCA managers, and also current teachers in the school system, as well as some who have finished college courses on this recently. So we have really, really credible team working on the research for this over the last, gosh, it started about 6 weeks ago, 6 or 7 weeks ago, and it's probably easy 200 to 300 hours in research to put together this discussion tonight to show our listeners exactly the changes happening in the primary school curriculum and making sense of the ambiguous language used on the NCCA website. It looks very ambiguous. It can also look innocent, but by knowing the language and knowing the origins, as well as what we've seen in junior and senior cycle, we're going to uncover kind of some serious concerns that we have. Another video was done, which is just a 10-minute video on how to get the submission in. But tonight we'll be walking through the specific content. So I'll turn it over to you, Eugene, and you can share the screens as you wish.
Yeah, thanks, Yana. So I think that the title to this is, you can see it's the draft primary curriculum and education or indoctrination for social justice. That's the concern in a nutshell. So that's a one-liner concern, and we'll talk about why we have that concern. And you'll probably see it as we get through the material. So just some summary points at the very start, just over to kind of tee everything up. The consultation ends on the 7th of June. You could be watching this video months after the 7th of June. That's fine. Um, there's a definite social justice and environmental sustainability, global citizenship type agenda here, which if you were to go on to the UNESCO education material, you'll probably see very similar language and objectives. Not sure if it's coming from there or somewhere else. There's this new subject called social and environmental education, which the minute I saw it, I just said, well, that's the vehicle for part of this agenda for sure. It incorporates geography and history along with this social, environmental, climate kind of elements. The content, visibility, and learning outcomes are vague, and that's across all the subjects. So if you do look at the core documents, you will see this, and we'll dig into that as we go. There's a huge concern with regard to the degradation of scholarship in favor of the kind of broader cross-curriculum social justice and environmental climate themes. And it would be a huge concern that not only are we reducing down the subject time for things like history and geography and mathematics, but then that there's also going to be cross-curricular stuff going on, which will contaminate the other subjects as well. Again, reducing, because we've seen this. This has happened in the USA, so it's not new. And we can see it from the pedagogical approaches that are taken. And we'll talk about in detail as to where that concern comes from. And then age appropriateness. We are talking particularly the stage 1 and stage 2. So these are children that are perhaps just 4 or 5 years of age starting out, up to like the ages of 9 and 10 in the early phases. Obviously, when they get into fifth, sixth class, they're a bit older. And we have a huge concern that you're bringing on themes for such children which are inappropriate. And I'm not talking about sexual themes. I'm talking about, the climate catastrophe, the weight of social justice and oppression in the world, racism. Having those discussions with 5, 6, and 7 year olds, I think, is really inappropriate. And we see it in the curriculum, unfortunately. So let's get into it. So we're talking about the documents here, and we skimmed over this pretty quickly in the video that we did on doing the entries. I'm going to spend a little bit more time. These are the two research documents. So I have read through these documents, and if you really want to get into this, you do need to read these documents. The first document is pretty innocuous enough. It talks about curriculum integration and integrating subjects like history and geography together, for example, which is challenging. We shouldn't underestimate the challenge of doing that. And it does express some concerns around that, which are valid. I don't have any issue with that first document, the report one document. I think it's just a very honest reflection of what it is and of the concerns, and they raise a number of concerns, and they're quite valid.
And Eugene, just for the listeners tonight,
yeah.
Where can they find these documents if they wish to go through the detail themselves?
Yes, you'll find them obviously if you go through the consultation webpage, but they're a bit buried, right? So we will put the direct links in the description.
Okay, great.
So check the description of this video. All the documents, particularly the ones on this chart, they'll be explicitly referenced. The direct link, you just download. These are all PDFs, they're all downloadable. So yeah, no problem there. So the second document, report two, this is a little bit more concerning, and we're going to spend a bit of time on one of the sections in this document. It talks about pedagogical approach as one of the main aspects, and it also obviously looks at things like assessment, and it also touches on the integration issue. It's the pedagogical approach one, and you could argue assessment will be a challenge as well, and we do raise that later on. We'll come back to this one. This is the one that I probably have some concerns of, and we're going to take some quotes from this document a little bit later in the presentation. The curriculum framework document is very important. And again, sections in this document which raise alarm bells. Now, you could have a lot of alarm bells, but there's some very specific ones we're going to talk about in the course of this presentation. So that's an important document for people to keep an eye on and have read, actually. No harm having read that document. And these are the 5 curriculum documents which we went through. So we had a team that went through these, and we tried to get people, obviously, who would have domain knowledge in the specific areas. My background, I obviously looked at things like STEM, and I did look at the social and environmental one. I spent some time on that. We've had other people look at those and also look at the other ones. I didn't dig into the languages and arts. I took a brief overview of those. Other people on the team looked at those. But the input has been consolidated, and there are some commonality in terms of what we're seeing across the 5 documents. And when we get into the summaries, we'll kind of see that.
And just to credit Eugene, the teachers from the Irish Education Alliance, we had parents and different people from the Parents' Rights Alliance, Lawyers for Justice Ireland. We had retired principals, president of the Catholic Secondary School Parent Association, and then a group of retired teachers as well as previous NCCA staff members. So really, really good group of people to go through all of these. So this is great core working group.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And everyone kind of brings their own different angle to it, which is kind of very important. So let's move on. So we're looking at the primary curriculum framework. So we skimmed over this on the video when we talked about doing the submission. It contains these kind of key competencies as they kind of talked about them. And in general, I don't have a particular issue with them. The one that is problematic is being an active citizen. That's problematic, and I'll talk about why that's problematic in a little while. I think that's one of the areas particularly concerning. Now, there's other concerns because of the dilution. I would describe it as the dilution of the curriculum in areas in things like history, geography, mathematics, potentially English. Those would always be a concern as well, because they're foundational, and you're reducing the core foundational education for these children at this stage. That's a concern. So hold that thought for now. But being an active citizen is probably the most concerning one on this chart, and we'll go into that in more detail. So we talked about this briefly on the last video, again, talking about the difference between the curriculum for stages 1 and 2, which is junior infants to 2nd class, where you've got the heavily integrated subjects there, the STEM elements, the social environmental education. And it's only when you get to 3rd class in stages 3 and 4 where history and geography get now split out separately as their own subjects. And you can see that arts education gets split out, and you can see mathematics gets split out as a standalone mathematics. and also well-being and language. So all those subjects kind of get split out when you get into stages 3 and 4. And there's the religious ethical piece, the patrons program below, which we talked about in the other video. Now let's look at the curriculum time. So this is kind of important. And I guess this is where the concerns start to perhaps arise. I think for a language, we're looking at English here, we're looking at Irish here, and a foreign language. And obviously that foreign language might vary between schools. And you can see the amount of time allocation there. I think language 1, assuming that's English, does need a good, healthy amount of time. 3 hours, 15 minutes. That's probably okay. It's more time would be good, but it's probably not an issue. I think the issue becomes when you start looking at social and environmental education, which has got this allocation over a 4-week period, which looks pretty small. And that's been shared. Like that's geography, history, and all the other social environmental stuff. So there's a real concern there that that's initially, and particularly in this phase, as stages 1 and 2, that's not getting a lot of attention. Now, the issue we have is in stages 3 and 4, it does show the separate amount of time for history and geography because they separate out as separate subjects in stages 3 and 4. So that information is actually missing. We don't have that information. We just have this one blob again of social and environmental education. And the same applies to the arts education. Again, we're not seeing how that breaks out here. And the same on well-being. Like how much of well-being is going to be physical education, for example, because that's part of well-being.
And Eugene, just to jump in, so for
so
stages, we're looking at 3 and 4.
yeah,
Well-being then is a weekly allocation of 3 hours. So that's 12 hours a month. And then the social and environmental education is 8. So you're talking 20 hours of the child's month is the social, environmental, and the well-being stuff. Is that correct when I'm looking at that, right?
yeah, that would be
Yeah.
the combination.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it in a
So a
month.
lot of
So as I
time
said,
there.
yeah, but the problem with social environmental is that is integrating things like history and geography,
Oh, okay. Yes,
and
yes.
so they're in there along with all the other stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a concern. So I think mathematics, you can see, goes from 3 hours to 4 hours when it kind of breaks out on its own. Um, yeah, that's probably okay. You need to be getting to the kind of 4 hour a week kind of level, so that's probably fine. And you can see all the other breakdown there. There's other times for breaks and stuff like that. So I guess it's not hugely concerning, but the main concerns are probably around things like as I say, history, geography are getting a raw deal, I would say here. And then we're not getting the detail with regarding to the breakout for well-being or arts education. We're not seeing how they break out.
And it's
So
probably worth
we're not
noting
getting the
that
full pictures.
I know this is primary school, but it's probably worth noting that the same people designing this also designed the further age groups, and it was brought to our attention by a mother in the Natural Women's Council that in the secondary schools, some of the core subjects like science, geography, some languages, home economics, business studies, etc., have moved from core to optional. And she said that her daughter had to fight for a place in a science class. So if that's what's happening kind of in the older years, you can be sure that that's sort of what their mindset is for this group as well, is less of the science, history, geography, more of the other stuff.
Yeah. And the other stuff is basically falls into 2 categories. It falls into SPHE,
Mm-hmm.
which got a huge allocation in the junior cycle, and CSP, the kind of civics aspect, civic and social
Yeah.
aspect stuff, again, which got a huge allocation, much more time. And that basically, both of those knocked out those core subjects,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the issue. So we're not looking at the junior cycle here, but I think you can kind of see similar challenges here. So
Yeah.
let's move on. The lack of information is probably is one of the key issues here. We're not getting all the information. So I'm going to jump ahead now to looking at the primary curriculum framework, and I'm quoting from it here now. So it's talking about this active citizenship thing, and talking about the skill. And this is again where I start to get a bit concerned, particularly when you're considering the age group associated with this. Again, equity, social justice, sustainable development, awareness of global challenges, climate change, conflict and growing inequalities. So that's kind of concerning for primary school, in all honesty. I just think you're getting into
It's the
stuff
same
that's
language,
potentially,
same exact language, Eugene, that we see
yeah,
from the United Nations and the World Economic Forum with the SDGs. The
it is.
SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals, which drive into Agenda 2030. And we've seen even our public
Yeah,
reps in the Dáil wearing the WEF Sustainable Development Goal rainbow lapel. That's the exact same language there that we're seeing here for the primary curriculum that is linked directly to the United Nations, UNESCO, all of that we've looked at, and the World Economic Forum. So it's the same global
yeah,
agenda.
it is. No, it is. And again, as I said, if you go through the UNESCO stuff, you'll see that
Yeah.
you'll see the same references, and this is one of them, Yana,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And you'll see the same references when we start talking about pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
So wait till we get to that. So, so straight away, I'm not actually comfortable with this. And again, we've seen this going on in other countries. And again, talking about democratic practices. Now, the democratic practices I assume they're talking about here is in the classroom. And that's a reference to the Paulo Freire critical pedagogy practices in the classroom. We'll talk about Paulo Freire in a minute. Um, so that's, I think, where that's coming from. Um, children's capacity and active and meaningful participation in society at local national level. These are young primary school children. Why are you saying this to these young primary school children? Like, this is not age appropriate, in my
No,
opinion. So
no.
this is from page 9 of the primary curriculum framework, and alarm bells ring for me when I see this. I do not think this is age appropriate. Start talking to these children about taking their place in society, and these kids, they still believe in the Easter Bunny. Some of them, they still believe in Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so why do we start talking in these sorts of terms to them? So we'll get into more now in a minute. So when you talk about social justice in this document, there's a section on pedagogy for social justice, which is critical pedagogy is one of the main methods of teaching. And we'll get into this in a little bit more detail as we get into it. And this talks about it here. Education is not neutral. It's political, basically. That's the underpinning of this thing. So we're teaching children in primary school politics. Like, this is the issue. Critical approaches. So the term critical that's been used here has to do with critical theory from the Frankfurt School. It's not to do with critical thinking. Even though they even say critical thinking some of the times, it's not. This is critical theory and critical pedagogy. These are my concerns. They reference Kincheloe. I'm going to talk about Kincheloe in a minute. They reference
And
Paulo
Eugene,
Freire.
for people who haven't watched our Corruption of the Irish Education series, do you want to just give a quick description of what pedagogy means for people who may not have heard that term?
It's pedagogy is the way of teaching. It's basically the way you're going to teach, the approach you're going to take in the classroom, how you're going to go about it, how you're going to introduce the subject matter. That's what it's all about. And there's all sorts of ways of doing this. Critical pedagogy is very popular right now in the context of social justice. So if you look up references for teaching social justice, you're going to get people like Freire, you're going to get people like Kincheloe, you're going to get people like Kumashiro, who isn't referenced in this document, thank God, because it's atrocious. So his approach is a queer approach, queer
Mm-hmm.
pedagogy for social justice, which we definitely wouldn't want to see in our schools. But unfortunately, both Kincheloe and Freire are not something I'd like to see in the schools either. Both of these people are Marxists. They basically see that education is for political end, it's for social justice, it's not for learning. Their priority is not learning. And you can use names, you might want to call it indoctrination, brainwashing, whatever you want to call it, but that's what it is. Freire, he talks about this banking knowledge thing. He's very disparaging in terms of how current teaching processes were. Now, he goes back a long way because he goes back to his time in Brazil, and we'll talk about it a bit more in a minute. And to be honest, I think some of what he's written and his approach is inappropriate. It might have been appropriate in Brazil at a time of huge poverty and oppression, but that's not Ireland in 2024, and it's not applicable to primary school kids in particular in Ireland, who are not under the same sorts of pressure. They're under very different pressures, unfortunately, but not that. So let's skip through it. Now you start getting this stuff talking about the construction of knowledge. And again, you can see critically analyzed. Critical pedagogy is referenced again, talks about Giroux, who's another critical pedagogist, and people constructing their own understandings through inquiry, etc. And then you get the thing about active citizens at the end here. This is starting to bring in elements of postmodernism in here, constructivism. Critical constructivism is actually the term that's typically used, which Kinchlow would have been involved in, not necessarily Freire, but you're getting into territory that I'm certainly hugely uncomfortable with from a primary school perspective, based on my knowledge of these guys, their books, which many of which I've read. And I think if any parent was to read them, they'd be a little bit horrified that their teacher was going to be exposed to some of this, unless you're a Marxist, of course, and you mightn't care. So let's go through
and
it a bit
Eugene,
more.
I'll just
Talks
jump
about
in, and
active
if any,
citizenship.
I'll just jump in if
Yeah.
anybody wants to read any of these books on the Natural Women's Council website, naturalwomenscouncil.ie. We have a resource section, and Eugene has put together loads of recommended book list, video list, and resources with some of those books that you referenced for anybody who wants to do their own research as well.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't necessarily be recommend, these wouldn't be the books I'd necessarily recommend people to read, but if they wanted to read them in the context of this, yes, there'd probably no harm. I'll take some quotes in a few minutes from a few of them so you can get an idea. You mentioned UNESCO. Yes, UNESCO fingerprints are all over this. If you go to the UNESCO website, talks all about transformational change, talks all about social justice, references Freire and critical pedagogy. He's heavily referenced actually in UNESCO. So no surprise that he's appearing here. So, there's an absolute alignment there. Okay, I'm going to move on from here. So again, you see the term global citizenship. So again, that's again a huge theme with UNESCO. And then social justice education. Again, we're talking about equity. We're talking about activism, social literacy. And then you see this whole thing include understanding of issues of inequity, racism. Yeah, you know what this means. You know what this means, critical race theory.
Yeah, we saw that it came out in the news, I think it was about 6 or 8 months ago, about critical race theory being added, proposed for Irish education. And I have the document, and it talks about privilege being, feeling privileged if you're white, male, or Irish. So that critical race theory, which is throughout schools all through America, wanting to bring into Ireland. And, we've said that of all the countries in the world, Ireland, who was oppressed for 800 years and does not have a colonial past, Irish people should not feel privileged for being white, male, or Irish. And bringing that into a primary school classroom is detrimental.
Yeah, that is totally, 100% agree. Yeah. So let's go through because we need to move on. So pedagogy, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this. It's the method and practice of teaching, as we kind of mentioned. So Paulo Freire and these poor little children being indoctrinated by critical pedagogy, revolutionizing education through critical pedagogy. So people think this guy is the bees and E's. He's a Marxist, fundamentally. His whole view is education is for politics. It's all about oppression, oppressor, oppressive. It's all about power relations. And the mechanisms for teaching, some of them are, people would say, well, it's a very modern, progressive way of teaching. But unfortunately, it can destroy your curriculum. So that's, and we'll get into that again in a little bit more detail. So he's heavily cited by the NCCA, and unfortunately, and he's anti-Catholic. If you read chapter 10 of his Politics of Education, he basically degrades Christian religion, and the religion he wants is the religion of Marxism. Being born again on the side of the oppressed is the words he uses in that book. So this is an out and out Marxist, right? And unfortunately, there's the church, unfortunately, the Catholic Church got very much involved in liberation theology, where they brought kind of Marxist themes into the church. And that was outlawed. John Paul II knew the danger of that because he knew all about communism. And so there was a lot of controversy in the Catholic Church trying to get that out. And it's maybe a bit of it still there. So there's a reference in page 27 of the social and environmental education draft, which talks about dialogical pedagogy, which basically means talking, children expressing their lived experience, which is a term that's very commonly used. You'll hear that term, lived experience, and generative themes, which is something that Freire very much into. These make the whole experience for the children can be actually quite pleasurable and enjoyable. And there's a lot of interaction going on. And they're learning about politics and they're learning about oppression and all that sort of stuff. But they're not learning the subject matter. That's the issue. And so this can get out of hand and it can degrade your scholarship and your learning in the school, unfortunately. And the other point is, if you go up on the web and do searches for education for social justice, and if you look at the kind of scholarship that sits around that in the last 10 years, and even the last 20 years, it's based on queer theory, critical race theory, post-colonial theory, and it's all based on critical pedagogy at the core. But it brings in all these other radical postmodern theories, unfortunately. And these should not be in any classroom, in all honesty. So, and these theories specifically have oppositional positions to Western society, Eurocentrism, whiteness, right, in critical race theory, not to mention religion, as I mentioned already. They justify them on the basis of social justice, anti-racism, equality, all of the DEI nonsense. This is woke through and through. This is Marxism, politics through and through. Even though Marxists will say that's nothing to do with us. No, we're not into postmodernism or anything like that. I'm sorry, guys. This is fundamentally the whole issue of oppression, power relations, at full stop. That's what it is. And that's what all of these ideologies are, all of these critical race theory, colonial theory. They're there for the destruction of Western society. We can see it happening in the universities in the United States. And for sure, we should not be bringing this into Irish schools. I'm sorry.
And
so
from a parental from a mother
mm-hmm.
perspective, I can just see that, thinking of, my young children, if this was pushed into their school, you have to think about what impact that would have on a child's mental health, their well-being, their self-esteem, their sense of belonging, all the things that we strive as parents to build the child up. This just breaks them down. And we already have a huge mental health problem in this country after the last several years. This would just absolutely destroy those young, precious, developing minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So these are focused on the political message. They're not on learning. They're indoctrinating children for activism and revolution and not on the primary goal of education. I'm sorry, it's not for education. So and I say it's just abhorrent to see them coming in here. And they all use this language to contribute positively and compassionately to creating a more sustainable and just world. You'll see that sort of sentence or that sort of ending to a lot of sentences on this whole topic. It's this language of empathy, that you see. We know, right? This is woke language. We should be able to see through it at this stage if you know enough about it. So this is Freire. I'll skip through it quickly. They kicked him out of Brazil because they didn't want this guy causing trouble, basically. He was a Marxist, so they got him out. And he wasn't allowed into a lot of other countries in South America. He believed education could not be divorced from politics. The act of teaching and learning are considered political acts, in his opinion. So why would we bring this into a school? He's heavily referenced. This particular photograph comes from a document I pulled from the NCCA website or from one of their servers. And he is, as I said, he's explicitly referenced in the UNESCO documentation and in the Report 2 document. Critical pedagogy, I'll skip through this very quickly, rooted in the critical theory. This comes from ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is very left-leaning. So, this is a leftist view of what critical pedagogy is all about. Linked to critical theory of the Frankfurt School. We covered that in the video we did on queer theory. We talked about the Frankfurt School in that. We might need to cover it again. It's all about becoming critically conscious, which means you're always aware from a Marxist perspective. So you're always looking for sources of oppression, and you're always looking for people who are potentially oppressed. And you look at that's your whole worldview becomes that. Social justice and equity. They want to become agents for social change, activists. That's what it's all about, creating activists. Contextualizing knowledge, lived experience is the thing that they typically talk about. And again, this is a problem. You get into the children in a huddle talking about lived experience. You've got a secrecy contract on that because the children are talking about their personal lives. So the parents don't know what's gone into that discussion. You can't disclose it outside the classroom. Problem, right? Reflection and praxis. Praxis means action. Take action to address social injustices. We're creating social justice warriors. That's what this is. Liberation and empowerment. It is what it is. I mean, this is bad stuff, right? And this is not teaching and learning, unfortunately. Critical pedagogy.
It's interesting they keep using the word critical, because until we're aware of this agenda and this background, you would think critical, that's great, it's critical thinking. But actually this discourages critical thinking because it turns those young, innocent children into social justice warriors to push whatever agenda they're taught to push. It actually contradicts the critical thinking to say, hey, let's use our brains and make our own decision with facts we have. They're not being taught facts. They're being pushed a social justice agenda.
They are. That's what this is all about. So here we go. Critical pedagogy. Joe Kinchelow. This book is referenced in Report 2, the NCCA Report 2 document. And Joe Kinchelow has a number of books. You can see it here. He's referencing 70 years after its development in Frankfurt. Critical theory, right? This is where it comes from, so he's not hiding it. And you can see what he's talking about here. Constructional nature, the discourse of possibility. Again, it's the same stuff. Pedagogy reflects these dimensions of critical theory. It's basically applying critical theory in the classroom. Now, this is a very worrying statement. It appears on page 48 of this particular book. In this context, critical theory questions the assumptions that societies such as the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the nations of the European Union, for example, are problematically democratic and free. Like, we can see how Western societies are being targeted right now. And here it is in a book on critical pedagogy. Joe Kinchelow is kind of showing it to us what this is all about. And you can be sure that what gets taught in the classroom is that our society is intrinsically racist, that we need to take out all the whiteness out of our society. We need to take out all of the kind of Eurocentric stuff out of our education system and look at stuff from other places.
Problematically democratic and free. I don't see being democratic and free as a problem at all, but teaching them are problematically democratic and free.
No, 100%. Yeah. They're not going to talk about China. They're not going to talk about Lenin in Russia or anything like that. I'm sorry, this is total political indoctrination. That's what critical pedagogy is. And we'll show you how that's, I'll have a reference in a minute, you can see how it's taken over the academy. So you can see it here. The terminology he's using, diverse forms of oppression, including class, race, gender, sexual, cultural, religious, colonial. This brings in queer theory, post-colonial theory, critical race theory. They all go as a package. That's like, once you're bought into one of these things, you're bought into all of them. And you're also bought into abortion. You're also bought into anti-religion. You're also bought into high sexuality, high-level sexualizing young children. They all go together. A person who agrees with one of these things agrees with them all in general. So this is what you're putting your
CSPE, just into. This for secondary school, CSPE already includes, we found in that book, things like BLM, the climate, LGBT, all of that is already in the CSPE books already as we speak today.
It is, yeah. We didn't get to cover that yet, but it is, yeah. So here we go. Freire's generative themes as one of his kind of social injustice, poverty and economic equality, education and empowerment, colonialism and decolonization, sustainability, identity and intersectionality. The kids won't be learning anything. They'll be spending on their entire day going through this stuff. This will contaminate most of the subjects on the curriculum. That's what we've seen in the US. The standard of scholarship just drops through the floor. because you spend all your time on these things and creating these radical social justice warriors that you won't spend time on the actual subject matter. It'll invade the subjects. Like they talk about decolonization, but this is actually colonizing your curriculum, colonizing it with Marxism, colonizing it with queer theory, with critical race theory. That's what's going on here.
This will looking at
Okay,
this,
let me
I mean,
move on.
this will destroy an entire generation
It would
of
do.
minds if this goes in primary school. It'll wipe it all out.
It would.
Shocking.
So again, ChatGPT 3.5, I asked it to give me, what are the concerns over this? And here it is. It says it. Most of the concerns that we have, it impacts your foundational learning and skills. It makes it very challenging to test because you're not covering fixed curriculums anymore. You're covering very fluid and constructed curriculums, that the children actually create for themselves. This is the nonsense. I'm sorry. I'm very negative on this. I really am. I'm an engineer. I'm not. So this stuff drives me absolutely nuts. Cultural relevance. Yes, again, they talk about the whole thing of, that may not resonate with our culture. Paulo Freire came from Brazil in a totally different age, in a totally different context. So why bring this sort of discussions on oppression and oppressors into our schools, and particularly our younger children? The complexity and depth of content may overwhelm students. It absolutely will overwhelm young students. This is going to be core to that social and environmental subject that is in stage 1 and 2 of the primary curriculum. So these are the youngest children you're going to focus this stuff on. Sorry, this doesn't.
We had a parent recently, a couple of weeks ago, who their child came home from school and they said they were in tears. They were very distraught. And they said, I'm not going to be able to have a family or have any children. And that was very, 10 or 11-year-old coming home saying this. And when the parents were discussing it with the child, they said, I was told about the climate. The world won't be here. The earth's going to burn up. And they were so traumatized. They took from that. They went home and said, I'm not going to be able to have children or a family. Their world will not be here. So it's information that is way above the age that this should be taught. And putting that trauma and that fear in a child's mind is very, very traumatic for them. And it will not only make them live in fear, but it will traumatize their mind where they won't even be able to absorb the actual things they are learning, like math and geography and science, for what's left of it, the remnants of what's left with that. They won't be able to absorb it because they'll be in panic mode.
Yeah, and there's a whole other discussion we could get into, but we don't have time here regarding how that could end up. So it's potential for indoctrination, ideological indoctrination, political activism in the classroom. So these are the concerns. So it's not suitable. You don't bring this stuff, you don't use this approach. I don't care how good people think is, and I know some very well-meaning teachers, have learned, because he's standard on curriculum, on teaching curriculum. He's pretty well standard, Frere, and people say, oh, it's great, and the kids, it's very interactive, and they get to talk about their lived experience, all this kind of stuff. There's a bad, dark side to this thing, and people need to be aware of it and have a reality check. Here is the comparison between critical theory and critical thinking. One side, it's all about social structures, power dynamics, social transformation, politics and activism. The other side is focusing on reasoning, decision-making in any context, whatever it is. And it's focused really on it. This is an educational, analytical tool. There's no political dimension to it at all. And it's not taught because they don't want people to learn the critical thinking, because if they learned the critical thinking, they might actually see what critical theory is all about and criticize it and see that they're being sold a pup.
If the children learn critical thinking, they might actually believe there's only two sexes. And certainly from what we've seen in the education program, they wouldn't want that.
Yeah, no. So I don't see any they talk about critical thinking sometimes. You might see them use the term. I don't believe it for the world. I think it's all about the left-hand side. That's what the curriculum's focused on, because that's what Freire was focused on, and Giroux and Kincheloe, that's what they're all into. Critical thinking is what children need to learn from as young an age as possible and apply it through the rest of their life. Really important. Critical turn in education. This is just for people who say, oh, that's all nonsense. There's no Marxist stuff. What are you talking about? This is the book, The Critical Turn in Education. This is when Marxism took over education. So where did all the radicals from the 60s and the 70s go? A lot of them went into universities, and a lot of them went into teacher training and cranking out books on critical pedagogy. That's where they came. Look at the very bottom sentence there. The word critical itself, which has become ubiquitous as a descriptor for left educational scholarship. The word critical. We've seen it everywhere so far. We've used it, I don't know how many times in the course of this talk. There's the book, you can read it. Talks about the critical turn in education, when education became Marxist. Now, this applies to the US, but we know that everything that happens in the US ultimately comes to Ireland. And ultimately, when you start looking at scholarship and people are looking at academic papers and reference material for pedagogy, they're going to get an awful lot of the US stuff, and it's going to be critical. So right now, to be honest, I wouldn't go near any of the scholarship with regard to pedagogy at the moment because it's toxic. It's all based on Marxist and postmodern themes, queer theory, critical pedagogy. To be honest, I wouldn't go through near any of it because you can't trust any of it right now. It's rampant. It's really in a very bad place. If you go up there looking and thinking that it's frightening actually to consider the sort of pedagogical approaches that could be brought into your school at the moment, which would be considered progressive. So this is the consequences, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, Jana, the consequences of a postmodern critical education, so to speak, if you want to use that, which means all of those critical theories, the postmodern theories as well. This is what you're talking about, this inducing guilt and victimhood, inducting children into things like queer theory and neo-Marxist politics of victimhood and oppression, of liberal sexuality.
Yeah, we're already seeing we're already seeing this brought into school, the program Canaltas, the anti-bullying, which all sounds good on paper, anti-bullying, but I've written to Norma Foley's office several times and I can't get an answer as to what are the bullying statistics? Why do we have to bring this in? I don't personally think that young primary school Irish kids are bullies at all. So why are we bringing it in? What are the statistics and the data showing about bullying? And they're absolutely refusing to answer, saying that data is held by all the individual schools. So my question is, if the Department of Education is bringing in this anti-bullying Canaltas and all of this because there's a problem, but then they're saying they don't have the data, it's held by the thousands of schools. That doesn't make sense. So it's absolutely the neo-Marxist politics coming in. It's nothing to do with young primary school kids being bullies. Irish kids aren't bullies.
No, it's an excuse, Gianna.
Yes.
Like the point about this thing, it's coming from the NGOs. They're pushing it into Norma Foley and the department. That's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
We know that, right? So this supporting radical theories, gender theory, is your gender socially constructed? That's postmodern view of gender, as we know. Replacing traditional religion and morality with the new woke morality, divides families, because basically your children you're not going to recognize your children after a period of time when they've been going through this. And I've seen that. I've spoken to parents, and that's not just for young children, that's for kids that have gone to university, who actually grew up okay, went through the regular school system, went to university. All our universities are woke at the moment. And the poor kids they're all woke now. They're all into social justice and all this nonsense. So I'm sorry, guys, you're just talking. This is just politics. That's all it is. And it's using the language of empathy, diversity, inclusion, and they all mean different things than what they really are.
So and they have no respect for young children. We saw in the junior cycle, age 12, are being taught that you can be a boy, girl, neither or both. So it's already teaching age 12 children who are going through the hormonal time in their life that they might be in the wrong body. I mean, that is the most disrespectful, hateful thing you can do to a child, is say you're born in the wrong body. It's madness.
But Jana, the point is, for Marxists, it's all about the revolution. They're in perpetual revolution. It doesn't matter collateral damage of unborn children or children that are trans when they shouldn't have been trans. They don't care, because it's all about the revolution. I'm sorry. I'm really being hard here on this video because this is the reality and people need to wake up to it. This is why you see communist flags at trans activist parades. That's what's going on. So this is a destroyer of childhood innocence, religious faith, any sense of security that the children have, and their future happiness. Ultimately, it'll take them years to get over this. And it totally compromises their foundational learning, because it's all focused on developing a critical consciousness, a racial consciousness, a queer consciousness. And who's going to suffer the worst? The most vulnerable children are the ones that are going to suffer the worst. So much for your equity nonsense. Your equity BS, I'm sorry, because that's what it is. Because you just want to indoctrinate the kids. You're going to compromise their education, steal their education away from them because you want to indoctrinate them. And the children that are going to suffer the worst, they're going to be the autistic kids, the slow learners, the dyslexic kids, the kids that need a lot of support and help. They're not going to learn anything. They're going to be totally ravaged, but it'll hurt all children. No children will come out of this unscathed.
And it's interesting. It's so inverted. I'll just jump in and say it's all about this, anti-bullying and the oppressor. But actually teaching this is bullying, because it's saying, if you don't believe in this, you're homophobic, you're transphobic, you're hateful, you're racist, you're this, that, and the other. And it's like, kids are not allowed to use their critical thinking. This will actually bully them into thinking this way. So it's actually, it's a bullying education, not anti-bullying at all.
Well, it is. And there's in one of the speakers who talks, she's done quite a few YouTube videos, a lady called Helen Pluckrose. And some people may know Helen and they may know James Lindsay, but Helen Pluckrose, she uses the term reified postmodernism. And the reason she used that term is because you cannot criticize it. It doesn't accept any form of criticism. It basically has these assertions that it makes regarding, systemic racism and all of that kind of thing, and gender, and you cannot criticize them. You will be cancelled. You'll be put down for criticizing them. And I'm sorry, guys.
So it's all about diversity. It's all about diversity and diverse thought until you think differently, until you have your own brain.
Yeah, correct.
So it's diverse if you think the same way.
Yeah, 100%. So these are the concerns. These are captured in the actual template. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about them. It's this vagueness, lack of clarity in terms of what you're going to learn. It's very unclear what the progression is as you go from one age group to the next. And why is that surprising? Why is that surprising after what we've just gone through? And it's going to compromise the core content. That's definitely it. And we do see this as you're going to end up with a worse curriculum than you had from a core content learning scholarship perspective. Issue in terms of minimum standards, because it's providing more agency, more flexibility. Lack of age appropriateness, we've talked about that, showing these themes, political themes for children, which are just totally unsuitable, more focused on the global world than on our children. And it's more about how to learn over what they're learning. So you've no real idea as to what the baseline is. When a child exits primary school, we now don't really know what baseline they have in mathematics and history. Well, we actually probably have a better view in mathematics because that curriculum was developed a few years ago. But history and geography, not a clue. English, I'm not sure. This is the issue. It's, the curriculum being taught through different lenses, being an activist, social justice activism, environmental activism, this whole notion of critical theory, which questions everything, problematizes everything for children. Their gender, their sex, the climate, racism, whatever it is, homophobia, everything's a problem. Bringing the children into crisis, as Kevin Kumashiro says in his books. Unfortunately, that's not a way of teaching kids. It's indoctrination. That's what it is. Talking about empathy, they use this word empathy all the time, and multi-perspective. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. So I don't think it's age appropriate, and it's not pedagogically sound. And bringing in these Marxist queer ideologies, they don't mention those terms, of course. They're not going to. They're not going to use that level of language because it'd be a bit obvious. I'm sorry, this is politically motivated, this curriculum. And then the visibility for parents. You can see it. They're going to have the lived experience, generative themes, secrecy contracts and pacts in the classroom. No school books, no proper school books. So you won't even know what the kids are learning during the day. And that's for subjects like history and geography. Never mind the social and environmental stuff and the SPHE stuff.
Yeah.
Again, more on that whole transparency. We've just seen it in the UK, where Rishi Sunak has come out and said that parents are entitled to 100% transparency, and they 100% are, and that should be happening here. I think we have to have a zero tolerance with the NCCA going forward. There should be no question of secrecy pacts. If the pedagogical approach you're using requires secrecy pacts, you need to find a different approach. That's my answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
There should be standard classroom materials. We should have standard books that the parents can get. So I'm sorry, this lack of clarity and definition, it's a non-runner. The age appropriateness and radicalization. There should be no radical theories in this thing. And not just gender theory, I'm talking critical theory, queer theory. And again, they won't call it queer theory. It's queer sexuality is what you'll get exposed to. That's what the kids get exposed to, this rancid queer sexuality that's not age appropriate and talks about consent for 12-year-olds to have sex with each other. That's what it's talking about. The contamination needs to go. This whole notion of whole school cross-curriculum stuff, I'm sorry, we need to kick that out, because that's again subverting parental rights, and it's corrupting the subject matter. Mm-hmm. So again, no tolerance. It can't be allowed. Parents need to get really agitated about this, because the NCCA are getting away with murder. And we've seen it from the junior cycle. People didn't know when they were reviewing the junior cycle what was going to happen. But we know it now. We've seen what they've done with the senior cycle. Mm-hmm. There's no transparency.
They haven't. So, it's very interesting that with the junior cycle, they didn't involve parents. With the senior cycle, they didn't either. And with the junior cycle, we have had multiple back and forth with the NCCA on the Freedom of Information Act request to ask them to prove that parents were involved, and they refused to do that. It's with the commissioner. They did not want parents involved in these consultations. I have 2 primary school children, and had I not been working on this with our groups, I would not have known that this consultation even opened in March. They do not want parents involved. And the fact that they are asking children for a secrecy pact, a child in class in primary school being told to keep a secret from your parents. If that doesn't terrify any parent, I don't know what will. But I've taught my children from a young age that we don't keep secrets. There are no secrets from mommy and daddy. No adult should ask you to keep a secret, because that was, years ago, you'd read these books that, people who are grooming children or sexually abusing children would say, you got to keep this a secret. It's between me and you. And that is grooming, and that is sexual abuse. And to actually tell a primary school child to keep a secret from their mommy or daddy should terrify any parent, no matter whether you're left, right, center, doesn't matter. That is completely dangerous and inappropriate.
Yeah, 100%. So fact-based knowledge, learning needs to be focused on this and related skills, not politics and activism. And then the appropriate pedagogical approach, literally any of the approaches that you're going to get from the academy right now, if you look at the papers and books that are out there, they're all going to be heavily weighted in terms of Marxist politics, critical pedagogy, queer pedagogy. That's the sort of stuff you're going to see. Critical constructivism. It's all unsuitable stuff. It really is. So they're just not appropriate. And then fundamentally, getting politics out, I just think that's what you have to do. And also getting age appropriateness in terms of any of the sexuality education. And again, I think the reference here to, again, Rishi Sunak, and basically they're saying they're not going to have any sex education for children less than 9. And I think that's 100%. I'd agree with that. That's not in line with the UNESCO and WHO standards, but we've already reviewed those, and we've seen that they're totally inappropriate, and no parent should be happy about them. So, let me get to the last slide. So it's a big stop sign. Yeah. So I guess people might be surprised. Well, maybe they're not after what we've just gone through. The curriculum is not fit to proceed as it's currently documented, in my opinion. And I think people can go and look at maybe some of the documents themselves and form their own opinion. But this is based on my opinion and the reading I've been doing and what we've seen happen in other jurisdictions, particularly in the US, where Freire is in every school, unfortunately. Critical pedagogy is all over the place. The age appropriateness, everything, desired outcomes, pedagogical approach, parental visibility, and just even the feasibility of achieving what they're trying to achieve by 2025, September 2025. I think it's a non-runner. So we definitely would welcome feedback in the comments from people, and particularly if there's parents, or not just parents, but even teachers watching this, would certainly love to see their comments, because teachers are ultimately going to have to implement all this stuff.
Mhm.
And I can't see a lot of teachers being comfortable with it. Certainly the teachers that were on our panel who reviewed this were not comfortable with this at all, and were not happy. And a lot of the issues, they were issues that they raised. Um, Significant changes are needed. And I think there needs to fundamentally step away from this notion of education for social justice, because that's what we're talking about. This woke agenda, this social and environmental stuff, these
Mhm.
themes of equity and social justice that are literally going throughout the entire curriculum.
Mhm.
This is political indoctrination.
Mhm.
We know all the harms. We talked about the potential harms for young minds, and it's stealing their education. It is stealing their education. I'm sorry. And it's stealing it from the most vulnerable children as well. So the curriculum, it's a shocking testimony, in my opinion, with regard to how the NCCA are now prioritizing politics over child welfare. We've seen it in the junior cycle,
Mhm.
manifestly clear, and here they're looking to do it again and do it, do it times squared this time, because they're going to do it right throughout every single subject and going to bring in all these totally inappropriate things. Start telling 5-year-olds that they've got white privilege. I'm sorry, this is not the way to do education. This is politics, indoctrination. And I've something seriously wrong in the NCCA. There's something seriously wrong in DCU. I'm pointing fingers at both of them right now.
Mhm.
And I think everybody who reads this, anybody who's got a knowledge of what's been going on so far in the junior cycle, should have the same concerns.
This is this
This is
is
really
this is a
serious.
thousand
The
times
people in charge,
worse. This
yeah,
is this is even far worse than the junior cycle concerns we had, because it's more relentless,
yeah,
it's more social justice, it's more sexualization, it's more ideological, but it's age 5. I mean, these children have no critical thinking yet at age 5. They are so vulnerable. They're just learning to read and write, and they still
yeah,
believe in magic and anything that their parent or teacher tells them. This will completely poison those young minds. So every parent seeing this should be terrified, be very angry, and really make a lot of noise about it. And people are probably watching this
yeah,
feeling, well, what can we do? I mean, they don't want their kids to be, indoctrinated with this. Opting out will no longer be an option, because as you can see from this, it's in every single strand of education. It's not like you can opt them out of the gender ideology or the pornography and the other things. You could opt them out of that specific piece. This is the entire curriculum. So it's really, really bad. What we are going to do about it, just to let our listeners and supporters know what we have planned, is on the Natural Women's Council website, there is the submission that Eugene talked about under the campaign school curriculum. There will be an NCCA submission. So the call to action is that you do a submission to the NCCA. There also will, following this, I think we need to develop a letter for parents to send to their own school objecting to this. There's lots of letters we have in relation to the gender ideology. There's a letter we have to send to schools based on the aftermath of the Cass report and the UK's turnaround on all of this. But this particular social justice woke agenda, I think we need to also develop a letter for parents to send to their schools on this piece as well. So that will come once we get through the NCCA deadline, which is in 2 weeks' time. So the other thing that we're going to do is the core project team working on this. We were talking about what else we can do, and we need to call a meeting, an urgent meeting with some of the public representatives, some of the TDs, the senators, of course, invite Minister for Education Foley, and really walk through the concerns that we have, walk through the material we're concerned with. It's in the curriculum now and what's to come, and demand that they put a halt to this. So we'll be setting up that meeting request with some of our local public representatives, the TDs and the senators and the ministers, to let them know that we do not consent to this coming into schools.
yep. So yeah, absolutely, Jana. So links will be in the description to the documents, the supporting books that I referenced here, so people can take a look at them. It's disturbing that we have to follow the trend from the USA Do we have to go down the same hole as they've gone down? You can see the disruption in US society. It's horrendous. You can see what's happening on college campuses right now. And that's all driven by these ideologies.
Mm-hmm.
It's all driven. It's not because Israel invaded anywhere. This
Mm-hmm.
stuff has been there. All it needs is another spark, like a BLM or something.
Mm-hmm.
This ideology stuff is corrupting minds globally in the Western world, and it's intended on taking down the Western world. And people will say, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory." Well, there is no conspiracy. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy behind it. I'm just saying this stuff has invaded academia, and
Mm-hmm.
it's gone from academia into society, into institutions, into schools now
Mm-hmm.
as well, and it's coming into our schools. It's already in them in the junior cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and it is destroying because it's designed to destroy Western society, to destroy whiteness, as they
Mm-hmm.
call it. Um, so when you learn enough about this, you'll see the truth. So hopefully people need to educate themselves. We'll have
Mm-hmm.
plenty of references, plenty of them on the website as well. And there's some other videos that other people have done, and we'll have we'll refer to a few of those actually. I will put in a reference to a video that talks about the destruction of third level education actually in the US. And that's kind of will give you the idea as to how this has happened and how
Mm-hmm.
that ultimately that's come into our institutions and then how it permeates down into schools. So we'll
Yep.
have a reference to a video on that, a very good video I've seen recently. It's about an
Mm-hmm.
hour long. It's about as long as this video, but it's well worth watching. It's really good.
Yep, that's great. I was just
Okay.
looking up, Eugene. I was just trying to recall the incident, and this is what we'll see if this gets into children's minds. It's already in the universities, but I was just looking up it was the Just Stop Oil activist. If everyone can rewind their minds back to those spoiled brats pretending to be concerned about the earth, so they went and threw soup at Van Gogh's sunflowers, and they were going around destroying artwork in different museums in the name of climate. They were going and being really destructive. So we do not want our children to come out of schools throwing soup on artwork in the name of whatever they're taught in school they should do. That's just absolute madness. So we have to stop this, and we will stop this. We'll do everything that we can, and failing stopping it, if there's anyone listening who is an investor who has very deep pockets, if you want to sponsor us, we will open our own hub of schools to actually educate, not indoctrinate. But for now, we'll try to fight the public school system and all of its failings.